From the follicles, this is Here Be Monsters.
So house calls are really interesting because when a client comes into the salon, their behavior is going to be adapted to that environment. But when you go and visit a client in their home, you're really getting a view of their whole life, their personal life, how they live, what their aesthetic is like, what type of person are they at home? You know, are they super neat? Are they a little bit chaotic? Do they have a pet? Do they have kids? Do they put a lot of importance into objects? So actually all of this is very helpful when you're doing someone's hair because it's giving you clues or insight into their character. And with hairdressing, ultimately what you're trying to do is frame the character, frame the person in front of you in a collaboration between how they describe themselves and how you may see them.
How many haircuts do you think you have given?
I wish I knew that answer. Sometimes I think about it. I sometimes have this visual of all the hair I've ever chopped off piled up in one pile in a giant warehouse or room, and I would love to see physically how much that is. It probably will look like an animal from a different time or planet, just a big, fluffy, furry, multicolored, multi-textured mound of hair where there's no features, it's just like fur and hair, basically. I often get clients that want big changes and they go from long hair to short hair. And even as I'm doing one of those haircuts, there's kind of like a little sea of hair around me in the chair by the time the haircut's done. It is, in a sense, a time log of your past. So to speak, let's say you have long hair and you cut, I don't know, a few centimeters or a few inches or whatever. And if you think about when that patch of hair grew out of your head and what was going on in your life at that time, not only like mentally or emotionally, but also chemically in your hair or biologically in your body. Your hair does sort of a record of that. And so, this idea of someone wanting to like release the past, I want to feel fresh, I want something new. This is actually a very primal psychological response that's very, very old in humans.
I'm going to try and get you again on how many haircuts do you think you have given?
I mean, let's do some simple math. I think I've done about 15 or 20,000 haircuts in total.
And of those haircuts, how many were people's final haircuts?
4. 4 that I can think of at the moment.
Yeah. Maybe we can take a pause for a sec. We'll come back and talk about that.
Perfect. Cool.
Here Be Monsters, the podcast about
what length the bangs should be.
The podcast about the unknown.
The sponsor for this episode is The Summer Diary of a Lady Artist. It's a fictional, illustrated diary of an artist navigating love and hatred.
I went to Cambridge today to see the lie of the land. I walked past his office, but too nervous to go inside. He has not seen me for years. I stood a few yards away. Then a young man came out, and I asked if Mr. Fonsuer was in. He told me Mr. Fonsuer had gone to Doycroft Hospital. Hospital? I tried to look more concerned than hopeful. Unfortunately, my brother was not ill. He'd gone on business. The young man looked at me oddly. Did he imagine me the disgraced sister? I walked home, over the bridge, by the river, and past a man-boy fishing. He was sitting, curved back, curved fishing rod. I stood away from him for a minute or two and watched. He had a fine profile, strong arms, good legs. I sat on the sofa, he at the table. He had a smattering of Latin. He read aloud, and I corrected his pronunciation and asked him the meaning of the words. Much later, slipping sideways into anger with a handbag full of weapons. Horrifying news in the hot summer landscape.
The Summer Diary of a Lady Artist is now available at all online bookstores. There's a link in this episode's show notes where you can buy the book, and another link over on the episode page on the podcast website where you can see some of my favorite illustrations. There are garden trowels and skeletons and figures in clouds. I really love the illustrations in this book. You can see those and find a link to buy the book at hbmpodcast.com. And thank you to Summer Diary of a Lady Artist for sponsoring this episode of Here Be Monsters. So I was thinking, we were talking in the interim, how do you feel about this idea of going present tense? And, I was thinking we would start with going to this house call, realizing your client has been diagnosed.
So, sorry, just to clarify, so if I'm doing this in the present tense, am I saying it like, okay, yeah, now I'm, how do I do that? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, the way that I'm thinking of it is just like walking through that memory.
Yeah.
If the memory is a kind of record or a photograph in your mind that you're looking at, just kind of explaining that.
Yeah, okay. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but I will give it a go. Yeah,
it can be a little bit hard because we're used to talking about memories in the past tense.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, so now it's 2015. Summer's coming to the end in Berlin. Fall is kind of around the corner. The leaves are definitely on the ground and the trees start to get a little bit more bald. So there's definitely more freshness in the air, a bit more breezy, colder nights. But there's still kind of a gentle warmth to the sun throughout the day. I am 34 years old, and my life is in chaos. I had gotten married the year before. I'm going through a divorce, and I'm living in my art studio in Neukölln. It's very high ceilings, very echoey, very worn down. The walls are dense, concrete, and cold. The wood on the floor has been painted over black, but has kind of scuffed back to reveal a little bit of the old wood from before. There's a small room and a bigger room. The small room has a giant hole in the floor in the corner, and it's got a couch that I sleep on, and not much more. So I have very cheap rent, but I love it. I love the studio. So I get an email from a long-term client of mine. And this client, we got to know each other when I first arrived in Berlin. He's a musician. And earlier in the year, he got very sick, had to go to the hospital and was diagnosed with a form of cancer. And so, I get a message asking to get a haircut. So, hop on my bike and I head over to Prenzlauer Berg.
What did your mom want you to be when you were growing up?
So my mom, was an immigrant to the U.S., was already in her mid-30s when she migrated to the U.S. with my brother and sister with 2 little kids. I think when you have a parent that comes, migrates from another country, they have very much so a survivalist mentality. So it's all about doing the type of work that will pay and support you. Classic occupations like being a doctor, being a lawyer. She really, really pushed on being a lawyer. But I didn't buy into any of it. I really was quite stubborn and rebellious when it came to what other people thought I should do with my life. Yeah.
And when your mom was telling you to become a doctor or a lawyer, what were you telling her you were going to be instead?
I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the time. I knew I wanted to do something creative. I knew I wanted to work with my hands. So being a lawyer or a doctor was not really clicking with that. So, hop on my bike, ride over to Prenzlauer Berg, and arrive at the building, ring the doorbell, I get buzzed in, I go into the Hof, I lock up my bicycle, have my backpack with my equipment, I head up to the second floor, the door's already open. And so I walk in the apartment, just like every other time before, yet this time I'm seeing someone I don't recognize from the last visit. We usually would do his haircut in his music room that was filled with guitars and instruments along the walls, a bit of recording equipment. But this time we actually do the haircut in the living room. And so my client at this point is now like in a wheelchair and has kind of like an oxygen tank and is unable to walk anymore. It had been a while since I had cut his hair, so it was overgrown. It had kind of lost its impact or its spark.
What is his request? What does he want?
This client, because he's a musician, he's very specific about his hair and had a very cool, almost like an English mod or English pop kind of look. Longer hair, mid-length hair, very stylish, very fitting to the character. And essentially, he just requested that he wanted to feel himself once more, wanted to kind of regain his identity one last time as he was going through this difficult situation. Yeah, I think getting a haircut is an interesting ritual, I think there's a closeness that happens. If you have a client that you end up doing the hair for many years, you see them go through different aspects of their lives. Getting married, to having their first child, to opening a business or losing a business or losing the parent or a friend, sort of these key experiences of life that either are traumatic or are just a defining moment. They'll express their happiness, their worries, their fears with you. You may consult them on them. you're lending your ear to them. You're giving them a safe space to unpack what goes on in their mind. There's been many situations where I've also benefited from this exchange. It's a really difficult relationship to put into one box. Again, you're dealing with self-image, you're dealing with someone's ego, you're dealing with someone's insecurities. And these are all things that require a degree of vulnerability, and trust to work them out. Yeah, being a hairdresser it's a whole spectrum of interactions,
So you're there, he's in the wheelchair, you've laid out your equipment on the table. What is the scene around you at this point? Is it just you two in the room?
Yes, it's just us two in the room. It was a one-on-one session as usual, and I was hit very hard also from seeing him in this state, I mean, you as the hairdresser are responsible for the image of this person or character. And then circumstances change, and now you have to dig deep to bring that character back. This particular haircut is all about the right choice of length. You cut it too short, it's gonna lose the texture. If you leave it too long, it's gonna flop around and not sit well. And in this particular case, it's all about those details. So I drape him, I throw the cutting cape around him, around the chair, and I can tell he's not comfortable or he's a bit in pain. But just like every other haircut before, he very gently sort of positions his head for me to start the haircut, and I section out the haircut. So I kind of make a blueprint of the different areas of hair, clip those areas away, and I begin the haircut in the back, not facing him. And he's looking at the wall, and the first thing he does is he asks me, what's going on with me? How am I doing? I think when death comes into focus, or when somebody knows their time is coming to an end, what I've noticed is people tend to now focus on what's most important for them. And in this particular case with him, what came out was the caretaker. It had been a little while, so I had to cut quite a bit of length off of the back. And once I do that, I start to give the hair some shape. The hair quality had changed a little bit also from treatments and all the medicine. And his facial features and body also had changed. I see his face, I see his body, I hear the oxygen tank and all of these, the monitor. And I'm trying to find his spirit in there and feeding off of that as I'm cutting his hair. I start in the area that needs the most work, and then I work around from that point to what needs less work. But I tend to move around a lot when I'm cutting hair. So if I'm cutting your hair, you might hear just my voice in the back of, coming from behind, and then you might see me pop over immediately, and then I might dance around to the other side, and then, I tend to move around a lot.
So you started at the back, and then you started moving around, and eventually to cut someone's bangs, you are kind of looking them in the eye, right? Yeah. And so when you come face to face, when you come around to the front, does anything change? Or?
I mean, I see his body, and his face is telling me the state of his health. It's a different face from what I've come to know. But his eyes, there's the familiarity, right? I see the person that I know. I'm looking at his face as I'm cutting his hair, or I'm deciding what length the bangs should be. And here I am coming towards the end of the haircut. I know that this session is coming to an end. It's a fleeting moment, you know.
Does he ever acknowledge that he's dying?
No. I mean, at this point, I think he had already came to terms with it. He was not avoiding anything, any part of that reality. He had recorded a lot of songs for like advertisements and commercials and stuff like this, that if they were to be used later commercially, that all the money or proceeds would go to his daughter. I think it spoke volumes of his character and the type of person he was.
How long does this haircut last?
It's an hour. It's an hour session. In this particular case, I don't want to do like a drive-by haircut and say, okay, ciao, thank you, see you later. Or, you know, thank you, bye.
I want this time to sort of go by as slow as possible.
I also had a hard time to say, okay, we're finished, you know, wrapping this up now. Hair itself has a very beautiful symbolism if you think about it, you know. I mean, here's this material that goes on a cycle of, you know, growing out, resting and falling out, and then renewing itself. So hair as itself, as what it is, as a material, and how it cycles throughout your life. All of this sort of symbolism is neatly stitched together to kind of say, hey, this is a moment, appreciate the moment, and, you know, this will not last. It's a privilege, you know, the fact that this person shared this one of his last days with me, or for a moment, for an hour, and still allowed me to be in their personal space, and still allowed me to see them in this way. I don't forget it, and I didn't take it for granted.
So you finish the haircut, you say goodbye, essentially, right? Then what happens?
Well, then I go back into my slightly chaotic life. The days go on, the days come. I think it was 6 days later, 7 days later, I got an email from his wife saying that he had passed away, and mentioned how happy he was that he was able to get one last haircut in one session, and how helpful it was for those last days. And they thanked me, she thanked me, and I try not to forget that. I think grieving somebody is, what makes it very difficult is you don't have access to this person anymore. They continue on in your memories, but your brain cannot make sense why they're not reachable, and, you know, why can't you get to them? Why can't you just have one more interaction? And with this client, again, because, you know, he had sadly left behind his daughter, I continued to actually have them as clients, the daughter and his wife. You know, I would go back to the apartment, and the guitars were still hanging up on the wall, and all the artifacts of his life were kind of still around. The little girl was quiet for the next couple of years. Almost not a word would come out of her. Yet she would look at me as if I was familiar. She knew I had been in the house before. And that's also very strange, you know, to be in an apartment where someone no longer lives, but you knew they were there, and then just their things are left behind, but they're nowhere to be found. Yeah, eventually I think with time everything heals and people come to a point when they're ready to sort of carry their lives in a new direction.
So you eventually get your divorce finalized, and then you found someone in the chair, right?
Yes. My divorce finally gets finalized. When it does, I actually had decided to move back to the US. I needed some distance. I just felt like I needed to rebuild somewhere else. So I pack everything up, and then I buy a one-way ticket and I go back. I'm working in a salon, and Berlin became kind of like a side of me that kind of went dormant, you know. For me, it was something fresh, so I was ready for it. And in missing Berlin, I went back to visit maybe half a year later after moving back to the States. In that time, I reached out to someone I knew who was a client of mine and asked if she wanted to get a haircut or meet up. And I had, in my mind, I thought, I'm ready to date. So...
Get a haircut or meet up?
Yeah,
is this a normal
no,
thing?
it's, she was a client of mine for a very long time. And it was a strictly professional relationship. And enough time had gone by since the divorce. And I was ready to kind of, explore dating again. And I didn't really know how to approach it, because it was always like under a professional circumstance. So with that wording, I guess I just thought like, okay, I'll just say this, but then leave the option in case maybe there's a chance to grab dinner or drink or just go and hang out a little bit, And that's what started probably about a year and a half of a long distance relationship. And as things sort of progressed, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to move back, because this can't go on forever. And it's been 6 years or so dating together now. And I think there's wedding plans coming soon. So looks like it all kind of worked out pretty well.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah.
In the last years, I've done some really incredible things, and I've been in moments of like, wow, I never thought I would, to be backstage on Fashion Week, or I never thought I would be on stage in front of a crowd working with people that I look up to. While that has all been amazing and has made me feel accomplished, it does not come nowhere near close as having the honor of cutting someone's hair the last time before they die. If I were to die tomorrow, I'd like to think that I would also find peace before the time is up,
Yeah. And would you hire someone to cut your hair?
Yes. My name is Rocky Villanueva. I'm from Los Angeles, California, but now I'm based in Berlin. I'm a hairdresser working for 22 years in the salon, doing hair backstage and doing hair on photo shoots.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cool. Rocky Villanueva is on Instagram at rockyvia.hair. There you can see the hair he's cut and you can hire him to cut yours. That's ROCKYVILLA.hair on Instagram. Here Be Monsters is an independent podcast supported by listeners and advertisers. If you'd like to advertise on the show, please fill out the short form at hbmpodcast.com/sponsor. And if you'd like to support Here Be Monsters with a small monthly contribution, please visit patreon.com/hbmpodcast. The Patreon page is where I announce news about the show, where I talk with listeners, and I share art projects that I'm working on. I've just added a new free tier that will let you follow news about the show and give you access to most of the content on the page. Music on this episode came from The Black Spot, Phantom Fauna, and Cerocell. Cerocell is a name that you've probably heard a lot of times in the episode credits. We've had a music licensing arrangement for probably 5 years now. And I find the music really chaotic and beautiful, and I have absolutely no idea how it's made. So in the coming weeks, I'm going to be doing an interview with Cerocell that I will be posting up on the Patreon account. And I'll probably also post clips of it on the show's Instagram page, which is at HBM Podcast. My name is Jeff Emptman. I produced this episode of Here Be Monsters. Many thanks to Johanna Gilia for connecting me to Rocky and for helping me come up with questions for the interview. Thanks for listening. More episodes soon.